Okay, so it's on the dot of 3, so perhaps we'll start now. So thank you very much for your patience, and thank you very much for joining us. So welcome to this very special event organised by the Cats in Halesworth. It's very nice to have you here with us, and also to support this wonderful arts centre in rural Suffolk. So thank you very much for your donations. I'm Catherine Larner, and I'm very excited about talking to Simon Garfield this afternoon about his latest book, Dog's Best Friend, which feels particularly apposite considering how much dogs have contributed to us all in this past year with all our lockdowns. So we'll be talking together for about 45 minutes, and then there'll be the opportunity to for general questions. So do please post these in the chat facility on your screens, and then I'll put those to Simon either at the end or as we go along. So do feel free to contribute as the conversation flows. But as you know, Simon's written quite a number of books. I think it's up to, is it 20 now?
I think this is my 20th, yeah. I mean, not all written through. So I think I've written about 14, and then I've edited about 6 collections of journals and diaries.
So it's still quite a number, and there's a huge range of subjects that you've covered. So we've gone from maps and map reading, wrestling, typeface, colour mauve, design in miniature, Radio 1, Mini, and also you've been involved in mass observation, as you say, editing wartime diaries, and also I think you're a trustee of that initiative, and we might like to come back to that at some point because it's very interesting. So hopefully we'll have time for that. But despite having so much to talk about, we do need to start by exploring your new book. So I wondered if, first of all, you could tell us, I mean, obviously it's so nice to have you here, but it's such a shame that we can't meet in person. So you better orientate us, first of all. Whereabouts are you, and what is this room? Tell us about your room.
I am in the, well, I was going to say, sort of the wilds of North London, northwest London. I'm on the edge, on the bottom edge of Hampstead Heath. So if anyone knows that area, it's sort of Gospel Oak, Belsize Park, part of the Heath. Yeah, I mean, it feels like, certainly doesn't feel like mid-May. It feels like mid-winter here still. I mean, it's extraordinary, really. I kind of, I went out on my bike yesterday and almost got blown off. So that's where I am. I'm in my office upstairs on the second to top floor. Lots of, what do we have behind me? We have all sorts of, we got a signed Clash album and a signed Patti Smith album, and sort of just various mementos of either my kind of music passions or kind of journalistic thing. I think you could probably make out a smoking David Hockney behind me as well. So all sorts of nice things. And yeah, this has actually only become my office really in the last year or so. So I'm still doing bits out, but it's been, I mean, you know, in the past year, it had to be a proper nice place to work, because I'm used to going to the London Library, which is in St James's Square, which is sort of where I did most of my research and work. And then occasionally, like one week in 6 or whatever, I would venture down to Cornwall to write and do a really kind of big focused week. And that I haven't been able to do, obviously. Well, you know, obviously recently we've opened up, but generally in the last year I've been in this room. So it's not, but I've got a nice view anyway. I've got a nice view onto ash trees and things.
Oh, good. And what do you need when you do sit down to work then? What are the periphery that you need, the paraphernalia that you need to get?
Well, I mean, God, I mean, it's going to be terribly cliche. I mean, I'm actually talking to you on my iPad, but I've got a big screen behind that. And I've got quite a nice desk here, really, lots of books. But obviously what you need is a bit of inspiration and a bit of, you know, a little bit of peace and quiet. Although I'm quite, again, I mean, the other, you know, I've mentioned the library and sort of Cornwall, but the other place where I used to write a lot, and I can't imagine actually going back to that so much, is coffee bars. So like a lot of writers, so I'm quite happy with a bit of white noise. And my wife is in the house, and my wife's youngest son is here as well with us. And of course, Ludo, who even though he's now an aging gent and advancing years, he'll be 14 in August. He's obviously still in charge of the whole house.
But he's not with us at the moment.
He's not with us at the moment. I mean, I've kept the door ajar. He's sleeping off his lunch and his walk in the bedroom, I think. So he may or may not make an appearance. But his hearing is now very poor, and so even if I was to call him, it wouldn't I don't think it would register. But anyway, if he can't it depends where my wife is. Obviously, if Justine is down in the kitchen and there's any food around, that's going to be the way better option for him than sort of just sleeping next to the radiator.
Excellent. Okay, well, let's hope that we have a meeting with Ludo at some point.
I can get, actually, Catherine, I mean, what I've done in his absence, I have got a lovely recent photo. You can see how kind of greying he is now. I don't know whether you can see him without too many reflections, but yeah, there we are. Lovely. And that's at the top of the stairs. You can see his grey beard now, so that's what he looks like.
And of course, he does make an appearance in the book. But can we go back to how that book came about then? So you've always loved dogs, but I understand that you were approached to do this book. So what were the things that appealed to you about embarking on this subject, and what did you already conceive as the challenges in taking?
Well, my editor, who I've been with for, I don't know, 4 books now, I think. We just have a chat, really, when time comes to a new contract and a new idea, and I say, what about this? And she says, what about this? And there's always sort of 4 or 5 ideas that get kind of thrown to the wind. And then she said, because she knows that I've lived with dogs pretty much all my life. So Ludo is my 3rd dog. I had a dog when I was a kid called Gus, and that's my nickname somehow from school, and who was a Basset Hound, very, very, very gorgeous, not the smartest of dogs. So he was my childhood dog. And then when my kids were young, we got a yellow lab called Chewy, and now obviously Ludo. So she knows that I've been with dogs all my life. And she just said, well, what about dogs? And I this is pre-COVID and, pre-dogs in the news every 10 minutes and everything. And I just thought, great, because the big question that I always wondered about was sort of why a dog rather than a beaver or a possum or whatever it is, why we live with dogs and why they're so much part of our lives, and why I get so much out of it, and hopefully why we give so much back. So it was sort of that, really. And then there were 2 other things which made me think, okay, our relationship with dogs is now really interesting. One was the opening of a dog cafe quite near me, up towards Whitestone Pond in Hampstead. And I kind of thought, okay, this is going to be, when I heard about it, I thought this is just going to be like a dog-friendly pub equivalent, so you can bring your dog in and that's great. But actually it's not that. So the dog menu is much longer than the human menu on this. So you can actually get, I mean, it's a bizarre place, but great. And obviously dogs get fed mostly kind of human food, but it's they will get an full English breakfast, which is sort of dog healthy food. And I thought, okay, so this is interesting now. So the dog's in charge here at this cafe. And then I read about this cinema in Balham where you could take your dog to kind of dog-friendly films. So there would be like Isle of Dogs and Lady and the Tramp and The Incredible Journey. There would be a different film every week. And you could sit next to your dog and they would keep the house lights up a little bit so they wouldn't get too scared. And they would get what they called, I'm afraid, pup corn treats. There we go. And the dog got in free, human paid. And I'd heard about kind of screenings where you could take a baby, so there would be very kind of loose, loose screenings where your baby would scream, and that would be fine because you would go with other parents who also had kind of screaming kids and enjoy the film, and that would be fine. But the dog thing was a new one to me, and I thought, okay, so taking dogs to the cinema, or dogs taking their owners to the cinema, that sort of, so the book became really an examination of how we got to that, and the human dog relationship over the years, well, over thousands of years, and how that's changed, and sort of who's in charge. And then it asks a question of, are we in danger of losing the dogness of dogs, the essential nature of dogs? Are we trying to turn them too much into sort of humans? So that was sort of the parameter, I suppose, of the book. And then towards the end of writing the book, COVID came along and sort of accentuated, heightened everything, really. So dogs were in the news. You couldn't buy a dog for love or money. The price of dogs went up 4 times. Dog trainers never in so much demand. Dogs were being nicked from outside the supermarkets, and all those kind of things. And people, I mean, the reason for all of that, of course, was because people felt, well, actually, this is the time now, if we're going to be locked down for months, to get a dog. So we have time to train a dog. Hopefully that the kids are sort of in your ear all the time saying, please, can we have a dog? Please, can we get a dog? And eventually maybe as a parent, you would give in. And also, it's a time when we've realized what incredible companions they are, and really how significant they are and have been in our lives. So it sort of came at the right time. And then the last answer, I suppose, to your question is, it sort of came at the right time, except if you want to launch a book about dogs when all the bookshops are closed. So it was, it was both good and bad.
Yes, like most things. So you're saying about some other things, that the phenomenon that we're experiencing in society today, certainly with Instagram, social media, the way that celebrities put themselves alongside dogs are voiced on social media, and all these different elements that are got quite strange. As you say, the relationship that we have, we're sort of making them into surrogate children or mini humans. But that isn't such a strange phenomenon, because in your book, you actually can trace that back to the Victorians, and you've got examples.
Yeah, I mean, the extraordinary thing, which I didn't really know about so much, I mean, I had a vague idea, but I really didn't know the detail, was how much we owe to the Victorians in terms of the way we treat our dogs. So yes, you're absolutely right. So, dogs on Instagram are everywhere, and I love look. I feel slightly ashamed enjoying those videos of dogs riding a bike or whatever it is, but they are sort of extraordinary addictive things. And my favorite one is one which I mean, I inevitably saw last week and would send around everywhere. And we've got a Ludo WhatsApp, like most dog owners and stuff. There's just extraordinary one of 3 dogs posing, 3 golden Labradors posing for a photo somewhere in Japan, and one of them brings out a cat from this pharmacy, I think, to also be in this photo. And as the photographer lines up and says, right, sort of to the dog, smile at the camera, the 2 dogs put their arm around the cat who's also looking at it. It's just extraordinary. But talking of dog photos, so there's this lovely picture here of a Victorian Labrador dressed up, in top hat and pipe and a high Victorian collar. And that's from the 1890s. So there's nothing, awfully new about that. So we dressed up our dogs then. We thought this was a good joke. The dog seems to be fairly relaxed in this position, and we've been doing it ever since, really. So, you know, as early as we could take photographs of dogs in hats, we have.
And you do, I mean, the book is ordered in, I suppose, thematically, isn't it? You could have taken all sorts of different approaches to it, but you do go back quite a bit of time in history and look at the relationship how that has evolved. And I wondered if you could just give us a bit of a snapshot of that, and to perhaps the starting point, and how that has developed, of the reciprocal relationship of, you know, whether dogs were hunted and how they were fed, and how that has developed to where we are today.
Yeah, I mean, we know a huge amount about our relationship with dogs and dog behavior, especially since we've been able to do genetic research and we've been able to look at the dog brain and stuff. What we don't know yet, or what we don't have an exact date of, is when our relationship with dogs really began. So the figure ranges from something like 15,000 years ago to 40,000 years ago, is when that development from the grey wolf, where we now know dogs, so everyone agrees that dogs originated with the grey wolf, when that dog began to become part of the friendly human experience. The thinking is, and the sort of generally accepted view of how that happened, was pretty much as it is now, a kind of mutual agreement between dogs, or the dog wolf as it was in the early days, and us. So we would be dwelling wherever it was, in Europe or Africa, and we would leave things outside our dwelling places, our kind of homes then. And this, let's settle on a figure of 15,000 years ago. So we would still be hunter-gatherers, we would still be absolutely in the wild. The dog wolf would come to us because there were scraps outside where we lived. And so they thought, actually, they don't have to kill, we're providing them with food. And we thought, actually, this is great, because the closer they come to us, the more we can use them for hunting purposes and for comfort and for warmth. The tamer dogs were the ones that won out, were the ones that actually got more food as a result of being closer to humans and less aggressive. So gradually that gene of being aggressive and wanting to hunt as a wolf died down. I think the other kind of, you know, interesting point about when this happened is that only recently, a few years ago, an archaeologist in Saudi Arabia found a large collection, I think 52 or 53 chalk images on rocks, which showed for the first time a dog being led on a lead by a human. These were sort of primitive Canaan Egyptian kind of dogs. The thinking was, well, this is the first visual representation of our kind of close relationship. So we were already, you know, as I said, they were already kind of tame animals at that point, and because they were on a lead, which meant that we already had a singular relationship with them. It wasn't just a pack of dogs. So that's sort of the general scientific thinking now about, you know, about sort of how that relationship began. And in a sense, it hasn't changed that much. I mean, the details have changed. What hasn't changed is, you know, in the domesticated environment, we still give them food and they still give us services. Now, we don't hunt with them as much as we did. Obviously, there are still hunting hounds and there are still, you know, hunts, but we obviously don't do that as much. That's not a key thing. But again, the big domestication of dogs as we understand it now, i.e. dogs living in our houses rather than sort of outside happened in Victorian times. So, you know, we credit in this country, we credit the Victorians with pretty much inventing the modern world, and it was the same with our relationship with dogs.
And the contribution, though, that dogs make to our lives, it isn't just the domestic setting, though that does dominate very often our consideration of it, but it's also so many services that they provide medically and in the military as well, because of even more things that we seem to be discovering that they're able to achieve and for our benefit. Can you say something about the little things they do there?
Yeah, I mean, it's so in the book, I kind of knew about the idea of sort of healing dogs, you know, and that again goes back. I attend an auction where they're selling off a kind of a really old bronze dog from 400 or 500 years ago with the tongue hanging out, which was sort of known as a kind of good luck healing charm. If you carry this dog around, because his tongue is hanging out, he will heal your whatever ails you, really. But I also spent a bit of time with a therapy dog at a hospital near me. He was called Bryn, or he's called Bryn, and he's I kind of think the most unlikely therapy dog that you could find. So a very lively collie. And I kind of thought, okay, so border collie, who we know are full of energy and want to be on the go and active all the time. And this dog was full of energy when they got into the hospital, and then chilled out. This was, I think he was going around oncology ward, so we had a lot of patients receiving chemo and in beds, you know, sort of just having other forms of treatment. And the transformation when Bryn entered their view or entered their bedroom was extraordinary, really. So a couple of patients didn't want to see Bryn because they were nervous of dogs, but the majority said, this is the highlight of cancer for me. I mean, I know it sounds extraordinary, but you know that it made their therapy worthwhile in a way. They absolutely look forward to seeing Bryn every Wednesday afternoon, and that was incredible to see. But again, that sort of goes back. So I found this passage that Charles Dickens wrote in one of his journals. So he was a dog lover, Charles Dickens, most of the time. There was one other incident where he actually wanted to shoot some dogs because they were interrupting his writing of Bleak House, I think, in Bloomsbury in a square, and he asked his sort of manservant to get him a dog. A gun rather, but I don't think any animals were harmed in the creation of Bleak House. But he goes around a hospital in East London and finds a dog called Poodles, who serves exactly the same purpose as Bryn. So Poodles would hop on beds, and he would remark how extraordinary the transformation was when the patients would kind of, you know, pet this dog. But now, of course, as you say, you know, it's bomb disposal, it's detection of all sorts of illnesses. I think there were some experiments in Texas for COVID, where dogs would be trained to detect signs of that as well. So there's, yeah, absolutely kind of no limit to the amount. I do say in a slightly sort of corny, but you know, true way, I think that in a way, dogs are therapy dogs, even if they're not trained as anything special. That's what they give, you know. So any dog owner will know that occasion where you maybe come home from work and you've had the worst day, or you're just feeling poorly, and a dog just knows, you know, a dog is instinctively will come to you and give you that kind of comfort and love. And you could argue that that happens, you know, even when everything's great. It's just that relationship, and hopefully we give as much back. But it's a, in answer to my question about why a dog and not a possum or, whatever else, sort of that's the answer.
And the story I particularly liked as well was the book therapy dogs, that they go into schools.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, now I don't think there's a university or school which doesn't have a visiting dog, especially during kind of exam time where everyone's sort of anxious, teachers and pupils as well, and a dog in the room just calms everyone down. And also a dog's presence, when doing like a reading session in schools and libraries, again, just makes pupils kind of fair, I think, I don't know if it's, focus as such, or it's something else, but yeah, absolutely. Anyone holding a class, I mean, as long as the dog sort of behaves, obviously. And if it doesn't, I suppose even more fun, but you're not going to get much learning done. But so yeah, exactly. Just having a dog in a room in most cases sort of it just increases the kind of heightens the love and improves the karma, I think.
Yes, wonderful. But there's also the aspect of training dogs, and you go into this in quite some detail in the book, both training the dogs, so talking to the people who do that training, and the theories behind it, but also touching on the fact that perhaps humans need a little bit more training, and perhaps that's even more so as people are novices and taking dogs in lockdown. Can you say something a little bit about the training aspect?
Yeah, so I went to see this fantastic woman called Susan Close, who used to just train kind of dogs who are out of control. And she used to have a special kind of a room with sort of we used to have very anxious dogs in a place just behind Euston Railway. And it's I think she trained sort of problematic dogs, maybe dogs that have come from a different environment and now are in a domestic environment. So maybe greyhounds, or maybe dogs that were just sort of maltreated, or dogs that just have a very quite an aggressive temperament. But then she realized actually the real problem, and the big problem is sort of domestic dogs who just run wild, whose owners kind of think it's going to be a lot easier than it is. And this absolutely speaks to kind of COVID times as well. So there was a lot of purchasing of dogs from people who thought, I have the time, but actually they didn't really think about the expertise that was needed and the patience and everything as well. And there was sort of outrage from, ridiculous sort of outrage from new owners who said, I can't understand why this dog is kind of weeing inside, having always experienced dogs on the outside. And then, so she says that psychologically, 90% of the problems are with the owners and only 10% are with the dogs, really. So she can teach them to, the easiest thing in the world is to teach a dog to sit and to heel and to come on command and all of those kind of things. The hardest thing is trying to convince the owners that actually they've got to change their behavior as well. So she says most of the work is with the owners and not with the dogs. It's sort of about expectations, really. It's sort of understanding a dog and having a certain amount of responsibility as well. I mean, now, of course, and I don't know whether Susan Close has addressed this, I'm sure she has, we have all sorts of other problems because of COVID and lockdown. So the pandemic puppy, so-called, is now going to have a real issue with everyone, not everyone, but some people kind of going back to work, even going back to work two or 3 days a week, is now going to have a big impact on a dog that is used to having their kind of humans around all the time. Now, some dogs may think, thank God, you know, they're finally gone and I can raid the bins or whatever it is, or I could just go onto the sofa where I belong. But other owners, kind of other dogs will find it extremely hard, I think, to actually have this sort of time on their own without constant attention and without sort of constant walks and things. So, I mean, even, you know, our dog, Ludo, we felt it was really interesting yesterday. So we went out yesterday for a meal in the evening, which we've hardly done in the last 9 months or so. And we were gone for, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours or so. And he's fine. He's got no problem in terms of having to go out or all that kind of stuff. And he's used to that. And he has been used to that all his life. But we haven't done it for about a year. And when he came back, he was not only by the door, as if we'd sort of deserted him forever, but he just went wild when he saw us again in a way that he'd never normally kind of does, you know, that he really, it's as if he couldn't understand where we'd gone and why. So as I said, he's almost 14, so he's sort of had that experience. So anyway, that's a big sort of, you know, psychological effect that I think dogs and owners are going to have to handle very carefully over the next few months.
And of course, you did meet a canine psychologist, Alexandra Horowitz, who you quote. Well, you talk about your discussions quite a bit in the book. What was the most surprising thing that you found from that interaction?
Well, her line is really that one about, are we turning dogs into humans? You know, that kind of element of the sort of essential kind of dogness of dogs, the appeal of dogs in the house has become one now where if we're not very careful, we spend all our money buying, you know, memory foam beds and dressing them up. I mean, going back to Susan Close, the dog trainer, you know, the first thing she would often say to an owner is, get that bow out of your dog's hair, you know. So that sort of absurdity and sort of Alexandra Horowitz, very much, who I didn't actually meet, but kind of some fantastic books that she's done about animal behavior. And her feeling is that we are now tipping the scales really kind of too much the other way. I mean, it's, you know, the dog industry is a multi-million, probably billion-pound empire. And it's one which is always constantly encouraging us to buy more and more stuff that the dog probably doesn't really need. And that goes from, you know, a certain form of diet to a ridiculous form of clothing or toys or whatever they are. And then it's all fed in, you know, via the vets who get sponsored to stock a certain sort of food. And then if you look at some of the dog magazines, their adverts are obviously dependent. You know, their income is dependent on adverts, and they therefore have to support, you know, what those adverts are selling as well. So it's a, you know, it's a cycle that we have to be aware of. Obviously, that cinema thing, the dog cafe, is sort of part of that. So my line on that is always, it's great so long as the dog really benefits from this. You know, is it for the dog or is it for us? So I went to, there's a whole chapter in the book where I talk about crufts, and I've never been to crufts, even though I've had dogs all my life. You know, unless you're, obviously you can go as a spectator to crufts and obviously watch it on Channel 4 and everything. But what you can't do is take your dog to crufts, and I wasn't aware of that initially, unless they're a performing dog. And that as well kind of ties into this thing. Again, began in sort of Victorian times. But dogs, performing dogs, and I'm not just talking about dogs doing those wonderful things of going through, you know, jumping over hurdles and going through those polytunnels and being trained in and those kind of acts that they do. The worst side of that is the kind of circus act I talked about, going to see a kind of poodle trainer in Las Vegas. And that's sort of the most extreme thing. But the dogs, do they enjoy it? I don't know. I'm sort of always in two minds. But the sort of, I suppose, less spoken of and more subtle form of humans and dogs and their relationship and us turning them into dogs that we want is obviously breeding. And you see that there's quite a lot of opposition from PETA in particular, the protection of animals against cruelty, really, who basically say that any dog show is a form of cruelty, because what you're trying to do is achieve a perfect dog, a dog who will achieve a perfect score, when judged against other dogs, which means you train, you breed certain traits out of a dog and you breed other ones in. This, again, Victorian times, Charles Cruft, 1891, I think, the first sort of dog show, and the pets that would win prizes were the ones that would most meet the demands of what was the nascent kennel club then. And so that's a bigger question. And then, of course, we come back. This is the longest answer, Catherine, to the shortest question, I'm afraid. But it's sort of everything that, again, I'm going to obviously look at in the book, is designer dogs. So, two ends of that. One is the kind of the Vogue model dog with their little Chihuahua or whatever it is in the handbag, or a teacup. They're called teacup dogs because they can fit in a teacup. That sort of American Hollywood kind of, sort of craziness of having a dog as a kind of fashion emblem, the way you may have a brooch, but you've now got a dog or a handbag. And then just designer dogs, the Labradoodle, which began with all good faith. The story of the Labradoodle began when a man in Australia wanted to breed a dog that was going to be a great companion from someone who was hard of seeing and would be a guide dog, so a Labrador in this case, with a dog who wouldn't molt, because the partner of the person who was hard of seeing was allergic to dog hair. So the Labradoodle, the poodle who wasn't going to shed, and the Labrador, that's how it came about. Obviously, these then become very in-demand things for the right reasons, and then the wrong reasons, i.e. looks. And then when you had the Labradoodle, you would have the cockapoo, and then you would have, endless. And then, but that again, not a new thing. I found a cartoon in Punch that had, in the 1890s, that had a cartoon of a woman in a huge, sort of dress with all sorts of, a bustle here and this everywhere, walking through Hyde Park, being pursued by all sorts of weird dogs with weird names. It would be a bug dog and a dinosaur dog. And so that breeding, as I said, sort of began there. So kind of all those elements, it sort of, what's good for the dog is ultimately should be the question, not just, what's good for the human. But I will end all of that by saying that most of this, I think, and because I don't want to appear to be some sort of, old traditionalist who kind of hates the modern world and kind of hates the idea of having any dog that isn't a wild dog. And I'm certainly not like that. I mean, we've got a Labrador who is a kind of, a purebred dog. And he's got a pedigree name that I can't even remember. It's so long, But I think the ultimate thing is, we are doing most of this, I hope, with the intention of kind of love, you know. So we buy a Labradoodle because we want to invest our love in them, and we are going to look after them. The downside of that is that kind of dodgy breeding that goes on, and the puppy, you know, some of the awful conditions that we hear about as well. But I kind of like to think, you know, it's sort of, I can't put a percentage on it, but I still think the majority of all those things are crafts, and the people who want a certain type of dog and everything else, on balance, I hope is done with, you know, good intentions.
Excellent. Well, we are getting some questions now, but I've just got one more point before I go to those. Is that just how did you embark on the project then? Because you've already identified and displayed how many different subjects that there are to tackle, and you inevitably, I would guess, went off on all sorts of tangents as you went in further into your research, discovered more and more things. So how did you embark on it in the first place, in plotting, in planning your book? And then how did it develop as you discovered more things that you wanted to include?
Well, I mean, it's a sort of, in a way, I suppose, the Dog's Best Friend was pretty much written in the way that I've written so many of my books, which is take a topic that I'm interested in and want to find out more about. And that's that's the essential thing. And I used to just do journalism. And with journalism, even if I was writing a 5,000-word piece for The Observer or whomever, there was always a feeling that you never had enough time, and you weren't maybe paid enough to devote enough time to get to the bottom of something. And 5,000 words you can't. And the risk is that, you know, you end up doing something that's okay, but it's slightly superficial. So hopefully in book form, you have a chance of telling a much, you know, fuller tale. So for me, it's always a slightly journalistic approach. It's talking to people, it's going out and seeing more what I can. In this case, crafts, and I went to America to talk to the people who had, you know, developed the first the full dog genome, and then it's a lot of book learning, a lot of reading, and some of my own experience. And so hopefully within that, there will form an accessible and amusing and educational, illuminating book. And so that will hopefully be the case for maps or typefaces or miniature objects or the color mauve, or kind of, you know, that I'm trying to explain. And that will hopefully kind of work for this as well. So inevitably, you go down a lot of avenues that you decide you're not going to go down after, you know, having spent a week or two, whatever it is. I mean, I can't remember now, of course. Just in case you ask me, I cannot remember what subjects I decided not to cover in the book. But actually, early on, I decided not to cover the cruel end of things. I didn't want to do kind of dog fighting. Didn't really want to do hunting, because I kind of think that for me as well, that, you know, just dogs being taken out and shot when at the age of 6 or 7, when they're no longer useful as hounds, I think it, as well, was something I just didn't really want to do. I wanted the book very much to be a celebration of dogs in kind of all their form. So I suppose those were the avenues I didn't really want to go down. And then it's just looking for connections, you know, good stories and good anecdotes, and then trying. I love doing the architecture of the book as much as I actually like the writing. You know, so how will a book work from beginning to end is kind of always a big challenge for me, and then hopefully, you know, you sort of crack that most of the time. How will you take your reader through 15,000 years of history in a way that is hopefully a kind of, you know, a kind of amusing and smooth ride.
Oh yes. Well, and of course you've achieved it beautifully. So if anybody hasn't read it yet, then they must purchase a copy very soon. But we've got a question from Carol, who says, do you know when dogs became primarily pets rather than working animals?
Yeah, that again, I mean, I give the same answer, you know, I give all the hour, but it was absolutely Victorian times as well. So that's around the 1850s, 1860s. There's a definite move to welcome the dog indoors. Now, you can look at paintings from the Renaissance onwards, and you can find well-to-do people who could afford to have their portraits taken, you know, with their hunting dogs, and occasionally, especially women, with their small dogs on their lap or by their side. But the majority of cases of the dog coming into the front parlor, sitting by the fire, was absolutely kind of, you know, Victorian times. And that's as well is when not only the dog show began, but also the kind of the commercial element. So all the special things that you could buy for dogs in those, you know, that they thought of. And that was a raincoat. You could get a raincoat, Victorian raincoat, and special food. And a lot of the stuff in Victorian times, as you'd imagine, would be kind of quack stuff. You know, this is the only pill your dog needs, or whatever. And they would often be the worst things, and they would often be kind of chocolate or whatever, you know, you think. So that's the answer, really. I mean, it's sort of, you know, the Victorian time, and it's accelerated every year. But the thing to remember is that, you know, we talk about domesticated dogs, and so there are two definitions of domestication. One is dogs and humans as a bond 15,000 years ago, and then the other one is the Victorian thing. But there are still, you know, 80%, 85% of dogs in the world who don't live in houses, who live with humans and depend on humans for food and scraps, and depend on a community to leave stuff lying around and give them maybe a tiny bit of shelter as well and care when needed. And 80 to 85% are still known as kind of wild dogs, and only 15% or something, you know, live in our houses or homes.
There's a question from, yes, a question from Naomi, who says, a quote from Mark Twain: "The more I learn about people, the more I like my dog." Your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's no question that humans and dogs behave in a way that, I think, okay, our answer to that is when a human dog lover is alone with their dog, the amount of kind of names, I mean, this will go for cats and other pets, I imagine, as well. The amount of sort of nonsense that goes on in terms of the names that one gives one's dogs and the way one talks to a dog. And there is something called, you know, pet-directed speech. So the way you talk to a pet, which is, oh, you know, you're so sweet, aren't you a good boy, actually has an effect. They like that. Now, whether that's just they've been trained, rather than talking to them the way we would talk, you know, in a kind of normal way, has a direct effect. And Charles Darwin already was experimenting on the way we talk with dogs, and he would talk to dogs in that way. So his son, Charles Darwin's son, said, my dad becomes a totally different person around the dog and will talk to a dog in a totally different way. So obviously that's not new. Maybe that goes all the way back, you know, to original domestication. But no, I can absolutely sort of, you know, understand that thing, that the relationship that we will have with a dog is one, you know, not only unconditional love, but a kind of special relationship where you know, a dog doesn't talk back. I mean, not in a kind of obvious way anyway. I mean, it tells you what it's happy with and what it isn't happy with all the time. But I suppose certainly easier to get on with, and generally probably less moody, I imagine, as well. So.
We might get in difficult territory here. But what about the names that we call our dogs then? Because that's another huge area, really, and how that changes through fashions as well. Can you say something about that? And also,
yeah, well, we used to, I mean, talk about fashion. So in Greek, in ancient Greece, the names that the dogs were given were really ones that went with what they did. So, I mean, obviously, Fido and Rex, Latin names, faithful and king and, you know, royalty, like the dog would sort of rule the environment and kind of all that kind of stuff, and would have a regal sort of air to him or her, and that would all make sense. But then there were also, so a lot of the Greek names were to do with kind of hunter or barker or those kind of things, you know, that would protect. And so those have now pretty much gone. I mean, you know, there are still dogs called Fido, but I would regard those as almost kind of ironic names now. And increasingly, we call our dogs names that we would give our kids. So again, some of that is ironic. So, you know, I know of a dog called Dave, and you know, for instance, you kind of think, yeah, okay, that's like fine, and it's easy to call, you know, in a park or on you know, Hampstead Heath or wherever you are in Suffolk or elsewhere. You kind of think a dog would respond to Dave, but increasingly we're calling them. So the top 10, you know, names always in the last 10 or 15 years. Bella is, like, you know, a key one, and for male dogs, the number one is Max. You know, and these are, you know, these aren't crazy names at all. These are just very nice names. Bella, beautiful, and Max is just another easy one to call. But some of the I don't know whether I'll be able to find them now, but there are some fantastic dogs that the royal family gave us, and the Queen, I assume, sort of, you know, chose these names herself, gave to her dogs. Let me see if I can find some here. So these are, so she has, I mean, now I think the last one died very recently, but a list of dog corgis or dorgies, which are Dachshund Corgi crosses that the Queen has had, are like Sherry, Whiskey, so who named those one? Heather, and then there's some breeding ones, Lise, Maldwin, Lancelot, Buzz, Foxy, Mask, Cindy, Brush, Roosevelt, Crown Princess, Red Ember of Lise, Dawn, and then they sort of go on, so there's crazy stuff. So kind of everything. Actually, at the front of the book, more to make sure that people would buy the book, is I've got a list of all the dogs that Ludo has met, like over his 14 years on the heath, and sort of encountered, basically friends of ours, of course. And there's some sort of great names there. But anyway.
Well, we're running out of time, but I do need to ask you about the stories of dogs that have shown particular devotion and loyalty, or have acted, they've rescued people through the time, and how these become almost mythological. Their stories just get passed down because they've achieved so much for us. What do you think of those? Are they realistic? Is it true? How did you evaluate the stories that you decided to include in the book about that?
Yeah, there were two elements to that. Well, one of the, I look at dogs through kind of how they're portrayed visually as well. So there's one sort of theme or meme almost, I suppose, that appears in kind of Victorian dog paintings, which are dogs rescuing kids from lakes, you know, or from sort of any form of drowning. This became a trend, really. So any Victorian artist worth their salt doing an oil painting of a dog would have a Newfoundland, almost always a Newfoundland, pulling a soaked child from, you know, some sort of water. So that was another thing we didn't really, you know, talk about rescue dogs. And then, yeah, there were just so many stories that it's very interesting. We sort of want to tell these stories to ourselves of loyal dogs, of the ultimate loyalty. So the most famous one, I suppose, is Greyfriars Barbie in Edinburgh, where There's anyone who's been in to Edinburgh will have seen this this big tribute to a lovely dog who was called Barbie, as far as we know, a terrier that refused to leave its owner's gravestone long after this owner had died. It was just too much for this dog to kind of bear the loss of its owner, which is a great mythical story. Now, there may have been a lot of Barbies, no one knows how much of this is true, how long they were on their gravestone, but it sort of doesn't matter because we want that story. And there's one story which I really love, which takes place in Italy, where someone is killed in a factory during the Second World War, like 1941, who has a dog, and the dog just won't accept that the owner is dead. And the owner used to arrive after work on a bus, and the dog used to travel from wherever they lived and meet the owner off the bus and used to go home together. And it was just too much, that the fact that this owner never came back one day, and the dog kept on returning to the bus shelter and kept on returning, and kind of, you know, sort of hopeful every day that somehow the owner would return. And this dog became famous, and they renamed him Fido, classically. The Italian village where this happened kind of renamed him. And there's a fantastic YouTube clip which you can check out. Just put Fido Italy, hopefully that will be enough, of this dog going through the town. And he passes another dog on the way on this clip. And the other dog, I imagine, would say or would think, listen, Fido, just give him up. You know, he's gone. Just like, we know he's dead. Everyone in the village knows he's dead. Just, you know, forget about him. But Fido carries on to, you know, kind of meet what he hopes will be the owner. And this became a very famous, I think he then featured in Time magazine, and people sent this poor dog food from all over the world, really. So it then became like a fat Fido, and then would go on anyway. So, but we kind of love those tales. I mean, that actually, there is a bit of visual evidence for that, but there's a sort of human need to, as I said, you know, to sort of reinforce that bond.
Well, and I remember from childhood reading The Incredible Journey, and I mean, I'll never read it again because it was too emotional, but I do have, it's so significant, those sort of stories, aren't they?
Yeah, I can't watch that film without crying. I mean, I watched it, I haven't read the book, but I watched a Disney film, and yeah, no, I mean, even now it's sort of, I mean, you know, the big swell of violins and all of that obviously is terribly manipulative. But it basically says cry now, you know, but because the dog is back, or the dog isn't coming back, or whatever it is. But yeah, it's you know, we sort of, I mean, that's the other thing as well, is that, you know, we do I can't even say it now either, sort of mythologize our kind of, you know, relationship. I think well, like in all human relationships, we like to remember the good things, hopefully. And in fact, the book ends up at an extraordinary Victorian cemetery. So obviously I ask at the end, well, you know, how do we remember our dogs? How do we, you know, how do we sort of immortalize them? And there's this Victorian cemetery at the end of the Bayswater Road end, if viewers know this, of Hyde Park. There's a road that goes through, and then and on the left-hand side there's a gatekeeper's lodge, and behind there's a private Victorian dog cemetery with hundreds of dogs buried there. It's now closed to the public, but you can still go inside as part of a special Hyde Park, you know, tour. And you go inside and you see these incredible things. Again, names, you know, names we'd never use now, really. There's one there called Scum, buried there, and these kind of old names that we you know, Victorian names that we've discarded. But you know, the gravestones, that I would say they're like a menu in an old-fashioned Italian restaurant, one of those huge things. That's sort of that kind of size. So yeah, sort of how we remember our dogs, you know, and this goes back to, you know, Naomi's question about you know, sort of dogs being our you know, more reliable than humans, or you know, the answer we're always happy being with. I think is that the memories we have of our dogs are always, you know, some of the sweetest ones I think that we have.
Which is a nice way to end. Because we have reached our time, unfortunately, and there's so many other things that we could have talked about, and so many more things in the book. So if anyone hasn't bought it yet, then they have a treat in store, because there is so much more to delve into there. So thank you so much for all that you shared, and we haven't even touched on all your other books, which of course we couldn't have done today because there are too many. But I wish you all the best for what you're working on next. Are you very quickly able to say what you're working on next, or not?
It's oh God, well, I mean, what I will say without going into any great detail is one thing I have, although we're coming out of lockdown now, hopefully, is I've been doing my first shot at some fiction. So we'll see how that works out. You're either going to hear about that or you're not. So we'll see how that goes anyway. Well, great talking to you, Catherine, and you know, thanks for that, and thanks for everyone else who's sent in questions as well, even though we haven't got to all of them.
Yes, well, it's been lovely. So thank you so much, Simon, and thank you everybody for joining us. And as I said, if you haven't bought the book yet, then do hurry and purchase it without further ado. Do support your local independent bookshop in doing so. And if you haven't supported the cut yet and are able to do so, then I'm sure they'll be very pleased to get your donations. And also do look out on the website for any future events too. But that's it for this afternoon. So thank you so much and goodbye.